Thanks for tuning in to Directory Insights in 10 Minutes, brought to you by Guardians of the Directory. I'm your host, Craig Birch. As promised, the series is all about cutting through the noise. No fluff, no filler. Just practical insights for Active Directory and want to secure and manage their environments efficiently. So let's get into today's topic. Today's topic is going to be about shadow admin permissions, also known as what we call Active Directory delegations. So these are permissions that exist inside your Active Directory that may have been delegated in the past, but they're not part of any of the built-in groups. Think of things like domain admins, schema admins, account operators. These are groups or user objects that you may have granted permissions inside of Active Directory. So let's at least get a base understanding of what some of these commonly misconfigured permissions are inside your Active Directory. So let's jump there first. So if we look here in my screen, the first one we're going to talk about is force change password. So this gives the ability to reset the password of another user. So if I can reset the password of another user, this can definitely become a security vulnerability. The next one we're going to talk about is GenericAll. GenericAll is where we have full control over an object, read and write access. Generic write allows me to update any of the attributes of an object. And then WriteOwner allows me to assume ownership of an object. And then WriteOwner means I can actually modify the permissions of an object inside of Active Directory. The two that are bold here in the blue, ReplicateDirectoryChanges all and ReplicateDirectoryChanges, are permissions that probably already exist in your environment if you're a hybrid Active Directory environment, but they're also the same permissions that allow an attacker to perform a DC sync attack in an organization. So where should we look for these shadow admin permissions? Now, this will not be a complete list, but let's start with the basics. So if we go to the basics, the very first place that we should look is the root of the domain. So let's look at the root of the domain in my Active Directory environment. And what am I talking about? What we should look at for the root of the domain? We want to look for the permissions and the security of this. So we can actually go in and even look at it from an advanced perspective. And now if I scroll down, I can see that I have some objects in Active Directory that have elevated rights. So let's get into one here, and I can see IGA admins. But I can see IGA admins has full control for this object only. But if we really go in and look at the effective access of this particular object, we'll see that this IGA admins is truly a shadow admin in my organization. So let's go in and look at what permissions they would have in my environment. So let's go in and view that effective access. So now if we view the effective access, you can clearly see that IGA admins has full control over the root of my domain. This isn't the only place that we want to look for inside of our Active Directory. So what are some of those other areas? Well, the next area that I would move on to is looking at domain controllers OU. Remember, that's where your domain controllers are stored, and if someone can have access to your domain controllers, right, they can take over your domain. The next one I would get into is any other sensitive OUs that may be where you store your service accounts, your tier 0 accounts, and even OUs that you may have set up for dedicated syncing to Entra ID. For example, I have an OU in my organization called Sync, where I'm syncing certain objects in my Active Directory to Entra ID. So again, you want to take a look at these OUs and objects inside your Active Directory. Now, I will list a PowerShell command as part of this video as well, because again, this is very hard to see inside of Active Directory if we're trying to look at these from just, the effective permissions or looking at the permissions themselves. So again, here I would use my favorite tool, PowerShell, very similar to what I showed in the admin SD holder video. We would use PowerShell to then go through and dump out those permissions, which I will link later on so you guys can download that PowerShell to kind of see what's in your environment. So again, shadow admins are those users or groups that you've added in AD delegations in the security tab of these objects And again, these are often overlooked by a lot of organizations, but an attacker will use tools like DSACLs or other tools, even PowerShell, to map these permissions. They can also use Sharphound to determine where these permissions exist as well in your organization. So if you do find a user or group that has these elevated rights, the first thing you want to do is, if it's a user, verify that the user should have those rights. And if not, move them. And if it's a group, remember, you need to go in and check the group membership and then inspect all the users as part of that group as well. That's it for today's episode of Directories Insight in 10 minutes. Remember, keep your AD security simple, fast, and actionable. If you found this useful, like, share, or drop a comment with your thoughts. If you got a topic you want us to cover, let us know. Until next time, stay vigilant and stay guarded and become the guardian of your directory.